relinquishing to the illness and trying to not blame yourself. What did you do
Mhm.
wrong as a mother or father? What did I do wrong? Where did I fail? You know, should I have seen something sooner? Should I have done something different? You can't change people.
I'm your host, Janine Casper of the Restoration Exchange, Banking on Humanity. I am a certified trauma coach. I am a WIDP affiliate manager, a technologist, a banker, and a money movement specialist. Today, we are going to talk about generational trauma and how it ripples through families, emotionally, mentally, and economically. Before we get started, what I'd like to do is call out Connie Davis at ConnieDavisSpeaks.com, who has enabled me to start this forum and be able to bring real world experiences from those that are currently in a stage in their life where things are continuing to evolve due to trauma, and also those courageous survivors who have found a way to be resilient. Also, I would like to recognize Kyle Goodnight with Goodnight Podcasting, who is kind enough to be our producer and help us make this a little bit more of a enjoyable listening experience for everyone. So today, we are joined by a courageous mother walking through the reality of generational trauma, how it's touched her life, her son, and how she's finding the strength to interrupt that cycle. What we are going to do is have an opportunity to have our guest share her lived experiences as a daughter, a sister, a wife, and a mother, watching generational trauma and addiction impacting her son and other family members while finding the courage to fulfill her inner needs in restoration. We will also highlight how mental health challenges and unhealed trauma can create real world barriers to stability, including difficulty maintaining employment, assessing or accessing financial services, and trusting financial institutions. Together, we'll discuss how awareness, community, and resilience can begin to heal both emotional and financial wounds. So, what we hope is that you walk away from this conversation with me and my guest to be able to recognize the signs of generational trauma, understand how trauma can continue to impact mental health and financial well being, preventing individuals from achieving economic stability, and learn ways to seek support, set boundaries, and rebuild stability as a parent and a family member. We hope that you will be inspired to begin your own journey towards restoration. So, when we think about generational trauma, what does it really mean? And based upon the research that I've done with several nonprofit organizations and others that I've been working with, we have defined generational trauma as emotional, behavioral, and systemic patterns passed across generations due to unhealed pain and or injustice. We also have found that we create masks in order to really navigate through trauma because we don't have any other tools, especially when we're younger and we're faced with those kinds of situations. And so, as we think about generational trauma and how that pain is inherited, and again, often without awareness, For my guest, I'd love to ask you, can you share what life was like growing up? Maybe the patterns or struggles that shaped you early on?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to thank you for allowing me to speak today, right? This is not an easy topic for me, and I'm not one to really talk a lot about this. So bear with me, but if it can help other people and it can create, additional awareness and services for people going through these types of things, I'm all for it. Um, but for me, I grew up in a, mentally ill family, a bipolar or, manic depression. And, and as a child, there was a lot of, instability and, as in a lot of families that have someone suffering from mental illness, in this case, my father, there was a lot of what I call self medicating. They both, my mother and father, drank a lot, I think, to just try to deal with all of the unknown and stressors and fighting and that went along with their relationship and raising 4 kids. Um, I know for myself, it was very confusing because I never really knew what was happening.
Hmm.
And at that time, mental illness was not something you shared even with family or friends.
Right.
And, it was always like, hey, we're fine. Everything's great. We're, an all American family. And, when you ask for explanations, my mom would just say, oh, everything's okay. Everything's fine. So you just kind of go into this, confused mode. But as I got a little older, I just wanted to fix it. I was the middle kid. I don't know, maybe just born with a little bit more tenacity and spirit. And so I would stand up to my dad if he was being mean, and while all my other siblings, went and hide, went and hid. And I think because of that, I grew up very quickly and became kind of that child adult. Um, and I think as such became a codependent. So, then you think about how that shapes you. I think I didn't really have a definition of what uh, a normal, quasi normal family was. I makes me think about a story when I was like in seventh grade and made the cheerleading squad, and I had a sleepover with these girls, and they were all talking about their lives, and I told a story about my father and how he was just burning papers over and over and throwing them into the fireplace to keep the devil out of the house. And they all looked at me like I was, like, wow, I didn't realize that was like, wow. And, but I think that's about the time I realized that, oh, there's a reason we don't talk about all this because people don't know how to respond.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. So when you think about, um, I would say that parenting style, which unfortunately was not a healthy one, as you became a mother, um, what was that like for you? And being married at a young age, how do you think that that shaped your parenting style?
Well, I mean, I married very young, 18. My husband was 5 years older, but, being a child of an alcoholic and living, in chaos, I chose another man that was an alcoholic and, it was great. But then, we started to see that same level of issues. And my sister, right? She also was bipolar, somewhat schizophrenic. And, you think about how that impacts, your relationships and your family and your parenting style. I mean, for me, you know, I I wanted to be more open with myself and my children. My sister was very 3 years older, CIO, very, very successful. And then when it hit her, she lost everything. She, didn't think she was ill. She uh, wouldn't take any medication. And, I think the hardest part was watching her two children struggle, and they lost, their home. They lost, she lost her job. She had to, file bankruptcy. There were no resources. Um, the kids went and lived with their dad, and she lived on the street for years. And, that gets into that side of the conversation that you and I've had many times where, the economic side of mental illness and trauma and not having the resources available. Um, so I tried not to just act like everything was okay. I think there's a certain part of me that probably did,
Mhm.
because that's the way I was raised. And then it hit my son. So, now I have a son with bipolar and schizophrenia, and I've been trying to fix that for years and years. Like, probably, gosh, almost 20 years now. And to watch your son struggle that much, um, and not be able to do anything about it, it's been pretty tough.
Right. And I'm so sorry that you've gone through such a not just a struggle, but thinking about your own life and your own mental health. And how have you been able to keep yourself grounded? Or what are some of the things that have helped you as, you would get that phone call in the middle of the night from your son asking you to do something? Can you describe what that was like?
Well, I think for any other mothers that might be listening, or fathers, or sisters, or brothers, that have someone in their family, your first inclination is to, you know, um, at least for me, I always felt like I was going to be able to control it. I was going to intervene. I was going to make it better.
Mhm.
I think the hardest thing about survival is understanding that you're not in control, relinquishing to the illness, and trying to not blame yourself. What did you do wrong
Mhm.
as a mother or father? What did I do wrong? Where did I fail? You know, should I have seen something sooner? Should I have done something different? You can't change people. People want to help themselves. And in my son's case, he became an addict, trying to self medicate, trying to make, himself feel better. And so now you've got a compounded problem, not able to work, not able to keep a job, living on the street. Um, because, you at first you want them to live with you, but then you realize you can't live with an addict. You can't have them, impacting your life every day, screaming at you, taking from you so that they can, try to make themselves feel better.
I am so sorry that you've had to go through all of the things that you have. And, being someone who considers you to be a best friend and watching you go through this through the years has been challenging, but I can't even begin to imagine how your heart feels right now. And I appreciate your your braveness and your courage.
Well, I, I just saying all this out loud, it just sounds so ridiculous, right? Like it sounds like someone else's life. And you asked me the question, like, how do I survive or how do you respond? And I guess that for me, I probably have just, I want to use the word survived, not in like a pompous way, but in a, I probably haven't dealt with all of it either.
Mhm.
I compartmentalized it and, just move forward and, try to um, recognize that it it's not for me to fix. Um, and it's tiring, frankly. I mean, when you've dealt with it your entire life of 50, over 50 years, you sometimes you don't want to deal with it. Sometimes I don't want to take the phone call.
Mhm.
Sometimes the phone rings and I don't want to pick it up because it's just it never goes away.
Right.
So that part's really hard. So, and I think now I know when the phone rings, it's more for financial support. Um, and because there just really isn't a lot of options for people who can function enough to, go through a job interview, get a job, but can't sustain it.
Right.
So, in the case of my son, he's been out of work for 7, 8 years, probably had 20 jobs, but he's only had them for a couple of months because, he even though he's on medication, he fluctuates so much that, he starts out great and then he thinks people are talking about him or he thinks his bosses doesn't like him or he's not doing a good job or, because he too, I'm sure struggles with self-confidence and, insecurities and, there's not a lot of the state funding for medical, it's very limited.
Mhm.
Um, you know, that it's as he describes it, it's a revolving door.
Right.
The psychiatrist doesn't remember him from one visit to the next. The counseling is, not it's superficial. Most recently he had went into a mental hospital because he was has voices and they kept him in literally 3 days and said, "Okay, you're stabilized," and let him go. That was
Oh
it.
my.
But the root cause is still there. He's still hearing voices, but he's supposed to get a job. He tried to get on disability and they denied him. So where do you go?
Right.
You know, they live on the street or they try to live with a friend for a while, but people get tired of that. Does he come live with me? I, you know, I'm not equipped to deal with the issues that he faces and it's a tumultuous, toxic kind of, we start taking on the roles that, instead I take on the mother role instead of the supporter role, and
Mhm.
that's not healthy.
Right.
So it's difficult.
Do you mind talking a little bit about, through your son's journey when he would get a job and then so that he would attempt to be more independent, he would look to other resources like banking accounts, loans, credit, all those kinds of things. What is it that you experienced, as a mother watching him go through that, and how has that impacted you financially?
Well, I'll be honest. I mean, I've paid his rent for years and years, and you know, uh, he has no credit, right? Because he, think of this, if you're in and out of rehabs and you're in and out of hospitals, sometimes you have insurance, sometimes you don't. You build up all of this debt, right?
Mhm.
And because of that debt, you cannot get a credit card, you cannot get a loan, and then when you do get a banking account, then they hit you with all these fees because you can't keep a minimum amount in there. And and they're not, I mean, in many cases, sometimes he's okay with a banking account, right? But many times he's not cognitive enough to like know that, he looks at his account and says, I have $150, but then, he doesn't realize he has six pending charges,
Right,
right? And so, and then they just take him with an overdraft and an overdraft and an overdraft. Well, now the 150's gone.
right.
So, it's just almost impossible to have any kind of economic stability if you go into people say, oh, well, just go to a shelter.
Yeah,
Okay, well, shelters require that you get there at a certain time so you get a bed, and then they let you go the next day, and then you're doing this every single day. You're living on the street, waiting and hoping you get a bed that night. And that how can you do that over and over and over, you know? There's nowhere to go.
right. And has that impacted you as well financially in your daily life?
Oh, I mean, he's asked me a couple of times, "Well, can you co-sign for me on an apartment?"
Mhm.
You know how hard it is to tell your son no?
Mm.
I did it once,
Yeah,
and guess who had to pay all the deposits and all of that, and then, take that responsibility on, then that hurt my credit as an individual, and so then you realize you can't do that, and, who can afford to pay their own bills and then their children's bills?
yeah,
Not very many people.
right. Where is it that you might see where the systems are and the lack of support, the lack of resources? Do you have an opinion of what systems could be changed, whether that be in the banking system or through other types of government or nonprofit assistance?
Uh, you know, I look at all of these, there's all these supposed plans and people that want to help and different agencies and all of that. But when you're out there, you have you don't know how to find those resources. You don't know where to go, or you feel helpless. You don't it's not available. There's nothing that, like, you can contact a phone number that can give you all of this information and put you in touch with different people, and or maybe the people that do lose their job and need assistance for 1 month till they can find another job, knowing that they have something they can fall back on or rely on. I think a lot of these people feel so hopeless,
Right.
and there's nowhere to turn, and they're like, "What's the point?" And then you start, like my sister, she couldn't fix it. She couldn't make it right, and she ultimately took her life.
Hmm.
So as a mother, you can't, you don't have all the answers or all the resources, but you constantly worry about when will that phone call be, something bad,
Mhm.
or stuff.
Yeah. One of my other questions, kind of to tag on to that, when your adult children are spiraling and they're making those painful choices that you can't control, how have you been able to keep that balance or even attempt to keep that balance within yourself so that you don't get wrapped into that spiral of that tornado?
Well, for me, faith plays a big part in my ability to cope with, the things that God thinks he can trust me with.
Mhm,
Um, I think that, you know, if it's addiction because of the mental illness or, that type of thing, or just addiction in general, there's um there's the counter to AA, the Al-Anon, right? In
mhm,
those books. I mean, I spent a couple years going to Al-Anon and listening in, and them helping you realize you have to relinquish control. It's
mhm.
not yours to fix. So that helps. And I'd say just the biggest part for my son is he's like just listening and just knowing somebody loves him, and telling him not to give up, and helping to brainstorm, well, what if you did this or what if you did that? Um, you know, and con- continuing to hope that things change and things become available. Um, I don't know. No, I've never put it in words,
Right.
you know,
So it kinda sounds like what you've described is a way that you've been able to set boundaries.
for sure. Yeah, for sure. That took a long time.
Right,
Um, it actually, to be honest, it's impacted my own relationships with friends, and my last marriage. Because I couldn't set those boundaries or had such a difficult time and was always giving away my resources, both financially and emotionally, to my son, that impacted my own relationships, and so it forced me to recognize and create those boundaries and be okay with it.
right. When you are thinking about the financial side of it and the systems that are in place, whether it's healthcare or banking, and they don't understand trauma, um, how have you been able to either be in the background to advocate for your family or be able to help them in that way without just throwing dollars at them?
I really don't know where to turn or how to answer that question, to be honest. I think we all think that there's, government aid out there that's gonna, I really thought that he would get that disability
Right,
that would help him, you know, at least have shelter. I mean, we're talking about the minimum things here: shelter and food,
right,
shelter and food, not finding happiness, not being able to, work through those demons, not being able to, you know, um, be mentally clear, but just be safe. Um, the government hasn't been there to help him do that. And I don't know any banking industry or or any banking uh, institution that is there to do that. Honestly,
right. So when we think about, parenting an adult child with mental health challenges and addictions and struggling, has there been, and you mentioned your faith and how big of a role that has played to help you somewhat stay on an even keel for yourself. How how could we help? How could the community help?
I think the biggest need is shelter
Okay.
for these people, whether it's temporary shelter so that they can get help with the root cause, right? Of, dealing with the trauma, dealing with the mental illness, and then, the trauma that's created because of the mental illness and all the issues that they have to live through. Living on the street is traumatic,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you think about like all of that. And so if there's, shelter and food and, and people who actually care enough to give them the right diagnoses, the right counseling, if we can get to root cause, we don't have so many people that we have to help,
Right.
right? I mean, that number just grows and grows and grows exponentially because we never actually get to the real issues.
All right. So, for the mothers or fathers and other family members that might be listening, as you think about your own experiences, are there any indicators, trends, signs that maybe you're aware of now? But again, if we're going to try to create awareness within our communities, and especially those that are listening today who are either in a position of needing help or wanting to help someone, can you identify one or two that you might be able to share?
That they may look for.
Uh-huh.
Well, I definitely say, kids in school, work, and academic interest, is certainly a key indicator. If they, loved school and then all of a sudden they hate it, they don't want to be, they feel like they're outcasts. They feel like they don't have friends. They become antisocial, or they, they're really happy and great and manic, and then for a month or so, and then, they go into these depressions. I think, you know, being very, very, all kids are moody,
Mhm.
but, I'd say it's if you use your gut. If your gut tells you that this doesn't feel right and I'm concerned about my child, don't just say it's adolescence and being a teenager, you know, do something about it. Be there for them and I would seek, professional help early. There are tests that they can do that will, give those indicators whether they're on that path of either, drug use or, you know, antisocial behavior or even mental illness.
Okay. Now that's very helpful. From a financial perspective, do you think there's any trends like being a sister and watching your sister become engulfed in the mental illness prior to her, you know, her world shattering? Can you think of anything between her and her kids that could be indicators that we all might be able to look for within our loved ones?
Well, I knew for a year that she was, the thing she would call me. We didn't live close, so, but we talked 2 or 3 times a week. And, she was, things she was saying wasn't making sense. It, um, telling me stories or the paranoid, of what was happening at work or, what was happening, in her neighborhood, things like that. They just didn't sound rational anymore.
Ah,
And, you ask questions and you probe you know, um, and talking, to the kids saw it, right?
right.
But you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped. That's the hardest part. In our society today is you can't you can't admit somebody to the hospital that's an adult.
Right.
They got to want to go.
Mm,
And that's probably the most difficult thing is convincing them to get that help when they don't think they need it.
right. Uh, you have been so insightful today, and I am so grateful um, for you to have trusted me and would know that I would create a safe and compassionate space to have this conversation. Um, because understanding not just about the fact that there is no blame for you as a mother or a father or a family member, there's no blame to place. And you've made that really abundantly clear today. And I just appreciate you being courageous to share those things with us and demonstrate your empowerment. Um, this is sacred work that I am doing personally and that the Inspire World Foundation is doing. And having your truth be out there and finding words to share things, even though you and I have known each other for many, many, many years. Today, you put into words some things that I think were very difficult, and it is very much appreciated.
I would love to see the foundation take, some of these needs and, become that advocate or that light that, points people in the right directions of where you can get that help and those resources and, you know, because it's hard to find and it's different from state to state and city to city and, you know, um, all depends on where you live.
Right. No, absolutely. Well, again, I thank you so much for being with me today and sharing some of your insights to be able to help others possibly see some trends or at least question their gut and or not question their gut, but trust their gut
Yeah, trust your
if
gut.
they're thinking about something. And again, I would absolutely love to thank Connie Davis at ConnieDavisSpeaks.com for giving us this collaborative marketplace to be able to share things like we have today. And also our producer, Goodnight Broadcasting, with Kyle Goodnight. And before I sign off, I would love to share a restorative exchange blessing for everyone that might be listening today. So again, thank you. May what we've shared here today bring light to those still finding their way and hope to every heart that's learning to heal. May our words become bridges, connecting stories, restoring dignity, and remembering us all that humanity is our greatest currency. Until next time, may you walk in grace, give with courage, and remember, when we bank on humanity, everyone thrives. Thank you.